My name is Claire Whitmore. I am 34 years old, and on the afternoon of June 7th, 2023, I stood at the back of a white tent strung with fairy lights in my parents' backyard in Naperville, Illinois, holding a glass of sparkling water I never once brought to my lips, watching a man in a charcoal suit walk through the garden gate, with the unhurried certainty of someone who had a court order and didn't need anyone's permission. My brother Tyler was 26 feet away from me. He was surrounded by 68 guests, family, college friends, neighbors, my father's work colleagues, my mother's book club women who had adored him since he was small, and he was laughing at something one of them had said with his head thrown back, the way Tyler always laughed, as though the world had been arranged specifically for his amusement, and he had never had cause to question the arrangement. There was a DJ playing something with a low, steady bass line that vibrated in the soles of my shoes, even at the far edge of the tent. There was a catered taco bar under a separate white awning with a handwritten chalkboard sign in my mother's looping cursive that said, "Congrats, Tyler." There was a 4-tiered custom cake near the dessert table with an edible image of a Porsche embossed on the top tier in white fondant and dusted with silver luster. And there, at the end of the driveway, its chrome panels catching every available angle of the June afternoon sun, was the car itself. A Porsche 311 in Carrara white, with the optional sport package and a small red bow still tied to the roof, still there from the morning reveal my mother had orchestrated before the first guest arrived. The car my parents had bought him. The car they had paid for with $147,000 that had, for my entire childhood and well into my adult years, lived in a trust account at Naperville First Federal Bank, under my name and no one else's. The man in the charcoal suit was Carl Hutchins. He was a recovery specialist for a licensed asset recovery firm called Meridian Recovery Services, headquartered in Chicago. I had sent him the address of my parents, home in Naperville, the date of the party, the approximate size of the guest list, and the 2 o'clock start time in a brief, professional email 4 months before the party. He had written back the same afternoon confirming that his team would schedule the recovery window for approximately 3:30 in the afternoon once the vehicle had been visually confirmed on site and the event was well underway. Carl did not hurry across the lawn when he came through the garden gate. He walked with the steady efficiency of a man who has performed a task hundreds of times and understands that hurrying it creates complications that patience eliminates. He had his clipboard, he had his documentation folder, and when he reached the Porsche at the end of the driveway, he did not speak to any of the guests, did not knock at the front door, did not make any announcement to the 68 people assembled under the tent 12 yards away. He simply crouched beside the front left wheel well and attached the court-authorized bright orange boot to the rotor assembly with a sound that was metallic and final and clean, the sound of a locked door, the sound of an account coming due. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't raise my glass or look at my phone or allow my expression to register anything at all. I stood there, composed, with my sparkling water in one hand and my posture entirely my own, and I watched Tyler's face change. I watched the laughter drain from it first. I watched the confusion come in behind it. And then I watched the slow and terrible understanding move across his features the way a weather front moves across flat country, slow, wide, and complete. What they didn't know, none of them except my grandmother Eleanor, my attorney Sandra Park, and the team at Meridian Recovery Services, was that I had been building deliberately toward that specific afternoon for 3 years. Not from rage. Rage corrodes. Not from bitterness. Bitterness distorts. From something colder and more useful than either of those things. From the understanding that some wrongs do not self-correct no matter how long you wait for them to. And that the only way to make something visible to people who have trained themselves not to see it is to place it in front of them in a form that cannot be reinterpreted. This is that story. Before I take you back to the beginning, I want to ask you something directly. What part of the world are you watching or listening to this from right now? What time is it where you are? I genuinely want to know. Drop your city or your country in the comments below, and the time if you're willing, and let me know you're there. And if you connect with stories about women who were drained and undervalued, and quietly decided they were done accepting it, please like this video and subscribe to this channel. We make one of these every single day, for you, for the women who recognize something in a story like this one and needed to hear it told. Come back tomorrow. Now let me take you to a house on Redwood Terrace Drive, in Naperville, Illinois, and a family that organized its love around its own convenience and called that love equal. Robert Whitmore, my father, is 58 years old. He spent most of my childhood as a regional sales director for a medical device company headquartered in Downers Grove, a role he held for 21 years and that required him to be persuasive on demand, which he performed naturally, and to sustain relationships through warmth and availability, which he was equally natural at. He is a tall man, 6'2", with a firm handshake and a laugh that carried across restaurant dining rooms and country club patios, and the neighborhood association meetings my mother chaired. The kind of man that other men described as a straight shooter, the kind of man that other women described as charming, the kind of man who understood instinctively that being liked was a form of currency that could be spent in a great many useful ways. He drove a silver Cadillac XT5 for the last 8 years of my childhood, and he kept it detailed at a shop on Washington Street every 3 weeks because appearance was not vanity to him, it was investment. He is also the kind of man who valued success as a concept that could be pointed at and gestured toward from across a room, and who organized his emotional energy around the outcomes that were most easily displayed to the people he most wanted to impress. His children were part of what he displayed. His children were, in a very real and very specific sense, an extension of the narrative he maintained about himself. And Tyler was the chapter of that narrative that landed best with an audience. My mother, Suzanne Whitmore, is 56 years old. She taught middle school English part-time until I was 12, and when she stopped teaching, she redirected the same meticulous organizational intelligence she had once applied to managing 31 seventh graders toward the management of the household, which meant, in practice, the management of Tyler. His soccer practice schedule, his team travel, his college visits, his social calendar, the careful construction and maintenance of the narrative she presented about her children at school pickup and at neighborhood association meetings, and at the Friday evening dinner parties she hosted in the sunroom with the French doors that opened onto the back garden. She kept a physical planner, a large paper one, with monthly tabs and weekly spreads, and she kept Tyler's commitments in blue ink and mine in black, which I discovered once by accident when I was looking for a pen. She did not do this on purpose. I am certain she did not do this on purpose. She did it the way people do the things that reveal what they have decided, without consciously deciding anything, automatically, without examination, in the small choices that pile up quietly until they become the whole of a pattern. My mother is not a malicious woman. She is a woman who organized her attention and her love around the child whose accomplishments were most easily celebrated in the presence of other people, and she did it so naturally and for so long that she eventually stopped perceiving that she was making a choice at all. Tyler James Whitmore was born 4 years after me, and from the day he arrived, the house arranged itself around him so gradually and so completely that it became the house's natural shape, invisible to everyone living inside it. My parents will tell you today, and genuinely mean it, that they loved both children equally. I do not believe they are lying. I believe they are describing something they feel rather than something they practiced. Tyler was a gifted athlete. By 14, he was playing competitive club soccer that required my mother to drive him to early morning practices 3 times a week, beginning at 6:15, at a facility 22 minutes from Redwood Terrace Drive. She did this for 4 consecutive years without complaint, because a visible talent is a comprehensible thing around which to organize a calendar. I took the city bus to my unpaid library internship 3 afternoons a week throughout those same years, because the bus route made it possible, and because no one offered a ride. Tyler received a brand new MacBook Pro for his 15th birthday. My father drove to the Apple store on North Michigan Avenue to select it in person and had it gift-wrapped in silver paper. I received a refurbished laptop my father found on an online resale site, handed to me in its seller's original packaging. He said it had the same processor. I said thank you and carried it to my room. Tyler's grade point average hovered at a 2.8 through most of high school. His teachers called it resilience and the demands of athletic commitment. My grades were exceptional throughout. I graduated valedictorian of my class. My parents called it expected. There is a particular kind of loneliness that belongs to the child who is loved in theory but overlooked in practice. It is not dramatic. It accumulates the way water accumulates behind a dam, quietly, over years, until the weight of it becomes the defining fact of the structure. 3 specific moments made the pattern impossible for me to unsee. The first was the summer before my senior year of high school. I had been accepted to a 6-week biomedical engineering research program at Northwestern University, competitive, fewer than 40 students from the entire Midwest, and I had already located a merit scholarship that reduced my out-of-pocket cost to $940. I brought the acceptance letter and the scholarship documentation to my father on a Thursday evening while he was watching television. He looked at them for 45 seconds. He said, "Claire, we've got Tyler's club soccer fees this month. The timing isn't great." I asked how much the fees were. He said that wasn't really the point. I went to my room and looked up the fee schedule on the family computer. Tyler's club registration that year was $420. That same summer, Tyler attended a 2-week residential soccer camp in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. My parents paid $1,200 for the camp and bought him new cleats before he left. I spent the summer reading published university research online and building the closest thing to a portfolio I could assemble from publicly available sources, which is a poor substitute for an actual research laboratory, and everyone who has ever tried it knows exactly that. The second moment was my high school graduation ceremony. Valedictorian of a class of 312 students. I delivered the commencement address in the Naperville North Gymnasium in front of students, faculty, and hundreds of family members. My paternal grandparents, Harold and Bet, had flown in from Phoenix. My mother's sister had driven up from Indianapolis with carnations. I stood at the podium and said what I had written and practiced for 3 weeks. And when I finished, I looked out into the audience and located my family. My grandparents were in the 3rd row with their hands raised. My aunt was beside them. My mother was smiling from an aisle seat. My father was at a folding table near the gymnasium's exterior door with his phone held horizontally in both hands. My aunt told me afterward, during the parking lot reception, that Tyler had a club soccer match that afternoon with a regional live stream broadcast, and my father had positioned himself near the gymnasium exit to maintain data connection so he would not miss any of it. He found me after the ceremony and said, "You did great, Claire, really great." Then he looked back at the screen. The third moment was Christmas dinner when I was 20 years old and home from the University of Michigan for winter break. Tyler was 17 and announcing at the dinner table that he planned to apply to the University of Illinois in the spring. He wanted to study communications. He wanted to be near the friends already enrolled there. He wanted to play intramural soccer without the demands of a club program. His grade point average was a 2.8. He had no scholarship prospects. He had visited the campus once and called it awesome. My father listened to all of this across the holiday china and the centerpiece my mother had spent an afternoon arranging, and he said, with an ease so natural it sounded effortless, "Don't you worry about the money, bud. We'll figure it out." He did not look at me when he said it. I was looking at him, and I felt, in that moment, the precise sensation of understanding something you have suspected for a very long time but never heard confirmed. I felt it settle into place, quietly, finally, completely. I returned to Ann Arbor in January. The University of Michigan had admitted me on a partial academic scholarship, covering 60% of my tuition. The remaining balance was covered by a trust account my parents had established when I was 18 months old, built over 20 years, through careful investment and through contributions from both sets of grandparents, each made with the documented and explicit intention that the money support my education. My maternal grandparents had specified this in the memo lines of their contribution checks. My paternal grandparents, Harold and Bet, had written it into the trust's originating paperwork in Harold's careful handwriting, for Claire Margaret Whitmore, Educational Fund. By the time I turned 18, the account had grown to $147,000. I had always known it existed. I had always understood it was designated for me. I was drawing from it in modest documented amounts to cover the tuition gap, and my living expenses in Ann Arbor, with the understanding, spelled out in the trust documents my grandmother Eleanor had shown me when I turned 18, that the remaining balance would carry me through graduate school. In the first week of February of my junior year, I filed a request with the financial institution managing the account to receive quarterly statements mailed directly to my address on Geddes Avenue in Ann Arbor. This was my right as the named beneficiary, and the institution processed my request without delay. I did not tell my parents. I did not mention it to Tyler. I called my grandmother Eleanor that same week, carefully and without alarm in my voice, and asked whether she still had copies of the original trust documents. She said she did. She asked why I was asking. I said I simply wanted them for my own files. She was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that is not emptiness but attention. Then she said, "Claire, do you have a financial advisor you trust?" I said I did not. She said, "I think you should find one." We ended the call not long after. I spent the next 3 evenings researching fee-only financial advisors in the Ann Arbor and Detroit area. I found a woman I trusted named Renata Solis, who worked at a small practice in downtown Detroit. I made an appointment for the following Wednesday, and I went. Renata reviewed the trust documents Eleanor had emailed me and listened carefully to what I had pieced together from the family financial records I had access to. She confirmed what I suspected. She said, "Claire, the cleanest next step is getting those quarterly statements in your hands directly." I told her I had already filed for them. She said, "Good." Then she said, "When they arrive, call me before you do anything else." The statements arrived by post in mid-March. I sat at my desk on Geddes Avenue and held the envelope for a moment before opening it. I read the statements once through at a normal pace. Then I read them a second time, more slowly. Then I placed them flat on the desk and sat with my hands in my lap and looked at them for a long time in silence. My parents had made 2 withdrawals from the trust account in the preceding 18 months. The first, dated September the 9th, was $68,000. The purpose listed was educational expenses for Tyler J. Whitmore. The second, dated November the 14th, was $79,000. The purpose listed was vehicle purchase, family asset. Together, those 2 withdrawals accounted for $147,000. They accounted for the entire fund. I did not cry. I did not call my parents. I did not pour myself something to stand with in the kitchen and feel sorry for myself. Though I understood, fully and precisely, what had been done and what it meant and how long it had probably been planned. I picked up the statements. I walked to my closet. I found the fireproof document lockbox on the shelf behind my winter coats. I placed the statements inside, alongside the trust document copies Eleanor had sent me. I labeled a folder with the institution name and the withdrawal dates. I closed the lockbox. I went back to my desk. I made a cup of chamomile tea, and then I opened my laptop and searched for estate and trust litigation attorneys in Washtenaw County, Michigan, because that was the next correct step, and I was, above all things, someone who took the next correct step. Her name was Sandra Park. She was a partner at a small firm on East Liberty Street in Ann Arbor that handled estate disputes and trust litigation, with a client list that was primarily women who had discovered, at one precise and undeniable moment, that a financial promise made to them had been quietly violated by someone they had trusted. I called her office the morning after the statements arrived. The earliest available appointment was 9 days out, a Wednesday at 4 in the afternoon. I took the city bus. I wore a gray wool coat and dark slacks, and I brought a manila folder with the trust documents Eleanor had scanned and emailed, the quarterly statements, and the contribution records from Harold and Bet, each bearing Harold's careful memo line. For Claire Margaret Whitmore, Educational Fund. Sandra's office was orderly and small. She had a window that looked out onto a parking structure. She offered me nothing to drink, which I appreciated, because it meant she understood we were not here for comfort. She reviewed everything across 45 minutes, while I sat in the chair across from her desk with my hands folded and watched her work. She made notes on a yellow legal pad in pencil, not ink. When she finished, she set the pen down and looked up. She said, "Do you want to pursue recovery of these funds?" I said yes. I also told her I was not ready to file anything yet. I wanted to wait. She recalibrated visibly, a small shift in posture. She held the pencil loosely. She said, "May I ask why?" I told her. I wanted to wait until my brother graduated from college. Until my parents had organized the party they would throw for him. Until the moment when everything looked, from any available angle, as though it had all worked out exactly as they had planned. I wanted the record to be complete. I wanted them to have the full experience of believing it had gone perfectly, before the experience of learning it had not. I wanted the sequence of events to be written in a way that could not be reinterpreted afterward. Sandra studied me for a long moment. She did not speak immediately. Then she said, "That is very deliberate." I said, "I know." She filed a legal preservation notice with the trust institution that same week, establishing a formal hold on the account and creating the foundational paper trail for the eventual civil case. The notice cost $640. I paid it from my own savings. The savings came from the 12 hours a week I had worked at the business school's research office for 2 years at $17 an hour, a job I had held quietly and consistently, and that I had never mentioned to my parents because I had long since stopped sharing things with them that I was not prepared for them to have an opinion about. I called Eleanor the evening after the preservation notice was filed. She answered on the second ring. I told her what I had done. She listened without interrupting, without offering comfort or alarm, the way a woman listens when she has been waiting a long time for someone to take a particular action and does not want to crowd the moment. When I finished, she said one word. She said good, in the exact tone of a person who has been waiting a very long time for someone to do the appropriate thing and is simply relieved that it has, at last, been done. Over the following months, I lived an ordinary life in Ann Arbor, while the case accumulated its necessary components the way a storm accumulates pressure, invisibly and continuously. I went to class. I worked my 12 hours a week at the research office. I attended Sandra's quarterly update calls, which were efficient and measured, and which Sandra conducted with the same calm precision she had brought to our first meeting. I filed the updates from those calls in the lockbox beside the trust statements. I did not tell my friends. I did not tell my roommate. I did not tell the 2 professors I was closest to, who would have been sympathetic and whose sympathy I did not want, because sympathy is a form of attention, and I was not interested in attention. I was interested in completion. The case was built over the following 18 months, with the methodical patience that good legal work requires, and that I was, by this point in my life, very practiced at. The trust documents were unambiguous on the central question. The fund had a designated beneficiary, which was me. Disbursements required the documented and mutual agreement of the account administrator, my father, and the named beneficiary, also me. My father had made both withdrawals without consulting me. He had also made them without notifying Eleanor, the account's secondary contact, who had a standing right to be informed of any significant disbursement activity under the terms of the original trust agreement. The institution's records showed no notification to either party prior to either transaction. When Sandra's paralegal contacted Harold and Bet in Phoenix for supporting statements, Bet said, simply, "We gave that money to Claire for school. Full stop." Harold sent a written statement that referenced the memo line on every contribution check he had ever written. When Sandra's team reached Eleanor for her formal statement, my grandmother provided it without hesitation and without drama or flourish of any kind. She said, "I contributed to that fund with the specific intention that it support Claire's education. I was not consulted about either withdrawal. I would not have consented to them if I had been asked." She signed the statement. She mailed it back the following day in an envelope with her return address printed in the upper left corner in the same font she had used on envelopes my entire life. My parents were formally notified of the civil suit through their attorney in the fall of the year after my graduation. My mother called me the night of the notification. I let it go to voicemail. She said this was tearing the family apart and she did not understand what I was trying to accomplish. I saved the message and forwarded it to Sandra with the timestamp. My father called 2 days later. He said the money had been sitting unused while Tyler had nothing, that I had a scholarship, that they had made a family decision, and that he had not expected me to weaponize it. I saved that message too and forwarded it with the timestamp as well. Sandra called me after receiving both recordings and said they were helpful. I said I thought they might be. My parents, attorney, argued that the funds were a family resource under the general authority of the account administrator. Sandra countered with the beneficiary designation, the contribution records establishing explicit educational intent, the disbursement authorization requirements in the original trust agreement, and the relevant Michigan trust law precedent, establishing that administrator authority confers management responsibility but not unilateral disbursement power over designated beneficiary funds. The civil judgment was granted in the spring of the year Tyler was set to graduate. Principal of $147,000. Accumulated interest bringing the total to $163,400. The Porsche, purchased with the second tranche and registered as a gift in Tyler's name, was subject to asset recovery under the order's provisions. Sandra coordinated with Meridian Recovery Services to identify the vehicle, file the lien, and schedule the recovery. Lien filed May 22nd. Court-authorized recovery order dated the same day. In late April, I called my mother during a brief neutral conversation about nothing specific and mentioned, in passing, that I was thinking of coming to Tyler's graduation party. I said it with the same casual tone I had been practicing for 3 years. My mother said that would truly mean a lot to Tyler, that things had been tense but family was family. I said I would try to make it. She gave me the date and the time and the address I already had. 2 days later, I forwarded the start time and confirmed address to Carl Hutchins. He wrote back within the hour. He said his team would handle it cleanly. If you are still watching this, I want to stop for just a moment and speak directly to you. Drop a comment right now and tell me if you have ever been the capable one in your family, the one who was expected to manage with less, because everyone assumed you would be fine. Tell me if you have ever watched something meant for you be given to someone else and been told it was just how families work. Just one word is enough. And if this story is landing somewhere inside you that you recognize, please subscribe to Revenge Chronicles. We are here for exactly this. We publish every single day for the women who were never supposed to make noise. Now let me tell you what happened at that party. On June 7th, I left my apartment on North Dearborn Street in Chicago at 11:52 in the morning. I drove 31 miles southwest to Naperville and arrived at 12:37. I parked 2 blocks from the house and sat in the car with the radio on until 2:35. Then I walked to Redwood Terrace Drive. I signed the guest book at the entrance table. I accepted a glass of sparkling water from the catering staff. I smiled at Peter Gallagher, my father's colleague of 9 years, who clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Claire, look at you." I found a position at the back of the tent near the garden gate with a clear and unobstructed view of the driveway. The Porsche was exactly where Carl's advance verification report had said it would be. The red bow was still on the roof. My parents were near the front of the tent. My mother in her pale yellow sundress. My father in his navy blazer. Tyler was at the bar with 4 of his college friends, white shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows, his face completely open with the ease of someone who has never once had to wonder whether the ground beneath him was solid. At 3:27 in the afternoon, Carl Hutchins came through the garden gate. He was wearing his charcoal suit. He had his clipboard and his documentation folder under one arm. He walked across the lawn at a steady, unhurried pace, the pace of a man who does not need to announce himself, because the paperwork in his folder is the announcement. Several of the guests nearest the gate glanced at him as he crossed the lawn, the way you glance at someone whose presence doesn't quite fit the occasion, and then looked away. The way you look away when you decide it is not your concern. He reached the Porsche at the end of the driveway. He crouched beside the front left wheel. He set the case on the ground and opened it and removed the boot and positioned it against the rotor assembly and locked it into place with the practiced efficiency of someone who has done this hundreds of times in hundreds of driveways. The sound of the mechanism engaging was metallic and final and clean. The sound of a lock closing. The sound of a debt being acknowledged. And it traveled across the grass and the 26 feet of warm afternoon air between the driveway and the nearest edge of the tent with exactly the clarity it needed to. 3 of the guests nearest the tent pole closest to the driveway turned at the sound simultaneously. Then a few more. Then more. The attention moved outward through the assembled 68 people the way attention always moves through a crowd when something has happened that everyone senses, but no one yet understands. The DJ's ambient track continued for another 10 seconds, a low electronic bass line that now felt wrong in the same way music in a hospital waiting room feels wrong. And then it stopped. The silence that replaced it was complete. Tyler was the last to turn because he was the farthest from the driveway. He had been mid-sentence with the friend to his left when the silence reached him. He stopped speaking. He turned. He saw Carl crouching beside his car. He set his drink down on the bar with a careful movement that was entirely unlike his normal carelessness, and he walked toward the driveway. Not running, not rushing, but with the deliberate pace of someone who is giving themselves time to understand what they are about to encounter. Carl stood as Tyler approached. He held out the clipboard. He said, "I'm with Meridian Recovery Services. I'm here to execute a court-authorized lien recovery on a vehicle registered to Tyler James Whitmore." Tyler took the clipboard. He read the first page. His jaw was set. He turned to the second page. He turned back to the first. He said, My parents gave me this car. Carl said, the vehicle was purchased with funds subject to a civil judgment, sir. The lien was filed May 22nd. I have the full order here for your reference. Tyler read the first page a third time. He stood with the papers in both hands in the driveway of his parents' house on Redwood Terrace Drive, and said nothing. The tent was completely quiet. Not gradually, but all at once. The way a room goes quiet, when everyone present understands simultaneously that the context has shifted in a way that cannot be undone. My mother was at the near edge of the tent, holding her champagne flute in both hands. My father was standing just behind her right shoulder, and I watched his face complete the sequence I had imagined it completing. Confusion, then calculation, then the specific look of a man whose carefully maintained construction has just been seen through from the outside by someone who had all the blueprints. He scanned the tent. He needed to find me. And he did. I was standing exactly where I had been standing since 2:43. Composed. Still, sparkling water in one hand. My expression the same quiet expression I had worn for 34 years, except that it meant something different this time. My mother crossed the tent. When she reached me, she said, loudly enough for the guests within 10 feet of us to hear clearly, "Claire, what did you do?" I said, "I let the legal process do what it does, Mom." She said, "In front of everyone? On his graduation day?" I said, "You spent my trust fund on his car, without my knowledge or consent. A judge reviewed the trust documents and agreed with me. I came to a family party. The paperwork reached its own conclusion." My father arrived beside her. He said, in his lowest and most controlled register, the voice he used when he wanted to appear reasonable while being afraid, "This is not the time or the place, Claire. When the party is over, we can sit down like adults and talk about this." I said, "The recovery agent is here because of a court order, Dad, not because of me. I came to a graduation. You brought the judgment when you spent $147,000 that had my name on it." Tyler came back across the lawn. He was still holding the papers. He said, "Dad, is it true? Did you use Claire's trust fund to buy this car?" My father said, "Tyler, it is more complicated than it looks." Tyler looked at the paperwork. Then he looked at me. He said, "Claire, I didn't know." I believed him. I have never doubted that Tyler did not know. He is many things, but he is not a conspirator in complicated financial arrangements. I looked at him and I nodded once and I said, "I know, Tyler." My grandmother Eleanor was at her table near the rose bushes, in her pale blue dress and her pearl earrings, watching everything with an expression of such perfect calm that it read as something ancient. She had driven herself from her apartment in Evanston that morning. She had been at that fund's originating meeting 32 years earlier. When my father turned toward her, looking for something, an anchor, a redirect, a familiar face that might shift the weight of the moment, Eleanor set down her cup of tea on its saucer and said, in a clear voice that carried to everyone standing within 20 feet of her, "Robert, you knew." Not an accusation shaped as a question, a fact delivered as a statement. 4 words. She picked up her tea. She did not look away from him. No one said anything for a long time after that. I left at 3:52. I put my full glass of sparkling water on a catering tray. I went to Eleanor's table and took both her hands in mine. She pressed them once and released them and did not say a word, which was exactly right. I nodded to Peter Gallagher, who looked as though he was weighing whether to speak and decided not to, which was also exactly right. I walked through the garden gate past Carl finishing his documentation call with the Meridian office, and I got in my car and I drove back toward Chicago. Somewhere on the interstate between Naperville and Joliet, I stopped at a gas station and bought a bottle of water and stood outside in the warm early evening air for a few minutes, listening to the highway traffic, feeling the specific and unmistakable weightlessness that arrives when something you have been carrying for a very long time is no longer yours to carry. In the days and weeks that followed, my mother called 14 times in the first 6 days. My father called 3 times. Tyler called once, on a Thursday morning 9 days after the party, and left a voicemail that was short and direct. He said, simply, "Claire, I genuinely did not know where that money came from. I need you to know that." I listened to it 3 times. I believed him. I have never doubted that Tyler did not know the source of the funds. He is many things: charmed, charming, accustomed to being given things, not particularly curious about where things come from, but he is not a person who constructs elaborate financial deceptions. He was a beneficiary of my parents' choices, not a co-architect of them. I called him back 8 days later. We talked for 20 minutes. It was the most honest conversation my brother and I had ever had with each other, which tells you something about the quality of every conversation that preceded it. He said, "I don't know how to fix this." I said, "I don't think it's yours to fix, Tyler. What Mom and Dad did is what Mom and Dad have to reckon with." He said, "They keep saying it was a family decision. Like, that makes it okay." I said, "A family decision would have included me." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Yeah." We ended the call without resolution, but the call itself was real, and that was further than we had ever gotten. My mother sent 2 letters. The first was 4 handwritten pages, the kind of handwriting that looks deliberate with effort, careful and close, and it said in many different formulations that she had never intended to hurt me, that family resources had always been understood as shared, that she was heartbroken by what had happened at Tyler's party, that she had cried every morning since, that she could not understand how I could be so calculated, that she hoped I could someday understand that they had acted out of love. The second letter came 3 weeks later. It was 1 typed page. It said she and my father had entered couples counseling together. It said they were trying to understand what they had not been able to see before. It said they hoped, when I was ready, we could begin a conversation. I read both letters once, straight through, without pausing. I placed them in the fireproof lockbox with the trust statements and the voicemail transcripts and the folders Sandra had organized at the close of the primary case proceedings. I have not read them again. I am not in a hurry to have the conversation my mother wrote about in the second letter. That is a different thing from being permanently closed. I know the difference, and I think it is important to name it. I am not punishing anyone with my patience. I am protecting the clarity I worked very hard to achieve. The conversation, if it happens, will happen when I am certain it can be a real one. Not a negotiation, not a reframing, not another version of the story told in a direction that leaves me absorbing the weight of it. When it is real, I will be there for it. Until then, I am here. The civil proceedings returned $61,000 directly through a structured settlement agreement my parents signed in exchange for dropping the remaining outstanding portion of the claim. Sandra advised me this was a reasonable outcome given the timeline and the costs of pursuing the full judgment amount through additional proceedings. The Porsche, auctioned through the court-authorized recovery process conducted by Meridian, brought $34,800. Sandra's total fees through the close of the primary case were $18,400. The remaining balance on the full judgment is the subject of ongoing proceedings, which move at the pace that legal proceedings move, which is to say slowly, which is fine, because I have always been good at slow. What I want to leave you with, now that we are here at the end, is this. This story is not really about money. Money was the unit of measurement we happened to be working in. What this story is about is something simpler and harder, and more durable than any specific dollar amount. It is about the specific courage required to name a thing that everyone in your family has quietly decided not to name. The courage to stop absorbing things that were never yours to absorb. The courage to not explain it away, to not file it under things that are complicated, or things that are just how families work, or things that happened a long time ago and should not be made into anything larger than they were. The courage to open a lockbox, find an attorney, file a preservation notice, and then go back to your ordinary life and wait through months of uneventful days. Wait through the small indignities of holiday calls and birthday cards with $40 inside. Wait through the slow, document-heavy machinery of civil proceedings. Wait through the entire year your brother spends at school on money that belonged to you, driving a car bought with money that belonged to you, building a life on a foundation you didn't choose to give him. Wait through all of it with your posture straight and your face composed and your lockbox organized and your attorney on retainer until the afternoon of June 7th, when you drive 31 miles to Naperville, sign a guest book, accept a glass of sparkling water, and stand at the back of a tent and let a court order do what 3 years of careful preparation made possible. There is a version of this story where the narrator is bitter, and the moral is revenge, and the ending is gloating. I am being precise when I tell you I do not feel those things. What I feel is something more like having arrived. Having reached the place I was walking toward all along, through all the months of quiet work and documented patience, and finding that it looks less like a triumph and more like a return. A return to the version of myself that existed before the bank statement, before the knowledge of what had been done, before I had to decide what kind of woman I was going to become in response to it. I have not returned to naivete. I have returned to clarity, to the feeling of standing on ground that is exactly as solid as I built it to be. I am not defined by this story, though I have lived it completely. I am someone who learned, through a very specific curriculum, that the people and institutions that dismiss you respond to documentation rather than to emotion, to legal standing rather than to appeals to conscience, to patience rather than to confrontation. I learned to work at the level where they could not redirect me. I learned that composure is not submission, that stillness can be the most precise form of strategy available to you, that the woman standing at the back of the tent with the glass she never touches can be the most prepared person in that tent, because she has done the work that no one else in the room can see, in the months and years before anyone knew there was work being done. That was the moment I stopped being the daughter who was expected to need less and started becoming the woman who knew precisely what she was owed and was disciplined enough and quiet enough and patient enough to wait for every piece of it to come due. If you have stayed with me through all of this, I want to ask you one question before you go. Have you ever been the capable one, the reliable one, the one everyone in your family assumed could handle it because you always had before, because you had never given anyone a reason to think otherwise, because you were so good at absorbing things that no one ever had to think about what you were absorbing? Have you ever watched something that belonged to you, money, credit, opportunity, time, recognition, a promise made to you by someone who meant it, be handed to someone else and been told that was simply how the family worked? Have you ever sat at a holiday dinner and understood, in a single sentence spoken across a table, that the math of your family did not include you in the way you had believed it did? Tell me in the comments. Tell me however much or little you want to say, a sentence or a paragraph or a single word. I read them. The team reads them. The other women who find their way here read them too, and they need to see yours the same way you needed to see this one. And if you know someone who is carrying something like what Claire carried, something they have named only in private, something they have never said aloud in a room with other people in it, because the room always seemed like the wrong one, please share this story with them, not as a how-to, not as instruction or encouragement toward any particular action, simply as a reminder that they are not the only one, that other women have stood where they are standing, that the feeling of being the capable one who was expected to need less is a feeling that other women have named and recognized and refused to let define them permanently. And that patience, real patience, the kind that comes with a plan and a good attorney and a fireproof lockbox and 3 years of ordinary days, is not the same as giving up. It has never been the same as giving up. All stories on this channel are fictional and created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real individuals, living or deceased, or to actual events, organizations, or locations is entirely coincidental. We create these stories because the experiences they illuminate are far more common than they should be, and because every woman who has lived something like this deserves to hear it told with the full dignity it earned. We are grateful you are here with us. Come back tomorrow. There is always another story waiting, and like this one, it was made entirely for you.